Welcome, everyone. We appreciate you being with us today. On behalf of the University of Texas College of Liberal Arts Development Office and Public Affairs teams, I'd like to welcome you to On Course with Liberal Arts, where we're proud to showcase the college's outstanding research and teaching. Today's topic is Reshaping Public Education in the Wake of the COVID Crisis and What Texas is Doing About It. It's my honor to introduce our expert speaker, Dr. David Yeager. Dr. Yeager is an associate professor of developmental psychology in our UT College of Liberal Arts Psychology Department. He earned his PhD in developmental and psychological science from the Stanford University School of Education. Prior to beginning his career as a researcher, he was a middle school teacher in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He also holds a master's degree in secondary English, a bachelor's degree in the program of liberal arts studies from the University of Notre Dame, as well as a master's degree in psychology from Stanford. If you have questions for Dr. Yeager throughout the talk, please type those into the chat function. We'll answer as many questions as possible in the last half of the webinar. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Yeager.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you. I'm going to pull up some slides and share some findings with you. I'm thrilled to be here and to share some of the things that we've been learning in our work on education and adolescent development. And we'd love for this to be a dialogue. It's the start of a conversation and an important set of challenges. So please do not hesitate to add any question, big or small, to the chat. I want to just say at the start that this is work that's collaborative with a number of people, including entities at UT Austin, including On-Ramps and the College of Natural Sciences and the College of Liberal Arts. So I'm just going to be a representative of a broad field and a broad body of evidence, and hopefully it'll start us into a dialogue. So here's what we'll cover today. I'd like to give you just a tiny bit of background so you're up to date on some of the core concepts. Then I want to lay out three major crises in education right now, and the three challenges that those crises bring to the forefront. And then I want to argue that these crises and challenges highlight the need for several overdue innovations to finally come to fruition. These are innovations that many people have been asking for some time, and I think our current situation suggests we need to take them more seriously. And last, I want to just preview a tiny bit about how we here at UT have not been waiting for the world to change. We've been trying to change the world. That is, a large group of people have been trying to just use this moment as an opportunity to make the what we think necessary improvements to the field that we think can make a difference. Okay. I'm going to start with a graph that many of you on the call may be well familiar with this, and even if you're not, if you went to high school in America, you're familiar with these concepts. This is an interesting chart called a Sankey chart, or a flow chart, and what it tracks is the flow of students through the math pipeline in high school in the state of Texas. And this is really, we're fortunate to have this kind of data. It's a gift from the TEA and ERC, which allows people to look at all courses that Texas students have taken over a long period of time. A former postdoctoral scholar of ours at the Population Research Center analyzed about a decade's worth of course-taking data. And here's what he finds. What he finds is that from the left to the right, that's the grade level, and on the x-axis. From the bottom to the top is the level of math that students are in a given year and eventually get to. What you see is that starting in 9th grade, of course, Algebra 1 is the most common course. The second most common course is geometry. The third most common course, a rare number of students, is Algebra 2. You see that there are already really large and broad inequalities in who is taking advanced math by 9th grade. So the bluer the line, the more economically disadvantaged the group of students is in that group. The redder the line, the more economically advantaged they are. That is usually by the percent of students whose parents have a bachelor's degree or higher. What you see is that already at the start of 9th grade, there are different tracks that students are on. And one track, the high track, the red track, leads to calculus. And you can see there are very few students who kind of fall off the track. The blue line, though, ends up at pre-calculus, or many times, actually, by senior year, algebra 2, or geometry, or even no math at all. So why does this matter? The reason it matters is because in educational transitions, like the transition from middle school to high school, students are making a ton of choices about which level of math to take, and it doesn't necessarily feel that consequential to them. They might just say, do I want harder math? Do I want easy math? What are my friends taking? How does this conflict with band schedule or extracurriculars? But it actually has enormous implications for whether they get to advanced enough math by the end of 12th grade that they're going to be prepared for advanced math coursework in college. And in fact, the majority of students who take calculus at UT have already taken calculus in high school. And so you're getting increasingly a selective group of people who are getting up to the top of this box here. But a little difference here can actually potentially get people on a different train track. Another thing you notice is a lot of students are dropping harder math in the 11th to 12th grade time. That is, students might have been on this trajectory maybe to calculus, but maybe they stay flat. Certainly students who are on this track have the choice to go up to pre-cal, but many of them go down. So what does this suggest? What this suggests is that, of course, different high schools have different course offerings and different opportunities, but there's something about the experience of being in hard classes that can be demotivating to students and could cause students who might have otherwise been on this track to say, you know, I've had enough of this hard math stuff. And that makes sense to them in the moment, but what it does is it prevents them from being ready for the advanced technical skills that they're going to get in college, like computer science or being pre-med or learning how to program in certain ways. And so there's always been a need to think carefully about the pipeline of course taking and also the inequalities in the pipeline of course taking. And this is relevant now in the COVID environment for at least two reasons. One, more students than ever a year from now are going to be starting ninth grade, maybe geometry, having essentially missed 18 months of school. So this is a train that's supposed to take you up all the way to calculus. If you don't actually have the foundation, it's going to be very, very hard for students to stay on that track. And you're going to see more students drop, go horizontal here, and fewer who are prepared for advanced coursework. The other thing you're going to see is students who were in 11th grade this year or last year, realizing they don't have quite the foundation that they need and not staying on track for the higher levels of math, whether it's calculus or pre-cal or AP statistics. So you're going to see in general downward movement probably for each of these parts of the pipeline. And furthermore, we're most likely to see it for more disadvantaged kids. That is, the kids who have fewer or less likely to have parents who have taken advanced math and have gone to college. Okay. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because you can very strongly predict whether someone gets to college 4 years later from the level of math that they take in ninth grade and the family factors like family social class. So this is a very simple bar chart. On the y-axis is the percent who were in college last academic year, 2019 to 2020. So these data are hot off the presses. The x-axis on the left is students who in 2015-16 took algebra, and on the right, students who in 2015-16 took geometry. You see two patterns. One, the bars on the right in general are higher than the bars on the left, which suggests that the level of math you get to is a strong predictor of getting to college. But the other thing you see is that the orange bars are higher than the blue bars. And what that shows is that kids whose moms had a bachelor's degree or higher are more likely to be in college, regardless of the level of math that they took. The final thing you may not have seen yet is that the effect of getting into and staying in advanced math, like geometry, is larger for lower social class kids. So compare the bar on the left, 48%, to the blue bar on the right, 74%, right? That increase right there of 26 percentage points is larger than the corresponding increase between the orange bars of just 17%. So what that suggests is that lower social class kids are less likely to get in advanced math, but they benefit more from it when they get into it. So again, when we have this crisis and more students than ever will be taking math that they're essentially unprepared for because they will have missed the last 18 months of schooling, and furthermore, that will be done inequitably because more advantaged families will make it easier to keep their students on track. They'll be able to hire tutors and join pods and so on, means that we'll have a larger proportion of the future workforce of Texas unprepared for advanced technical skills. And in fact, with all likelihood, the overall rates of the proportion of students who are prepared for highly technical work will be lower, and the inequalities in those rates will be higher than ever before. There are many other reasons why that's true, but just the math course taking example really drives the point home. So what you could say is that currently we're going to face 3 dual crises that any of them on their own would be massive problems that society would have to marshal huge amounts of resources in order to address. The first is we're likely to have worse and more unequal outcomes in our math and science education in particular, but also other subjects like writing and history than ever before. Perhaps people are saying that there will be greater inequality and lower overall achievement than any time, at least in inequality, any time since the Gilded Age, the 1880s. However, that's not the only problem, because there are also historically high levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. The levels of anxiety, especially among young people, kind of 25 and below, is off the charts higher than it's been. By some survey estimates, 40% at clinical levels, when in the past it's been around 15%. We really have not seen an exogenous shock in anxiety levels at this high in quite a long time. And last, we're going to need to basically accelerate learning without causing stress with fewer public resources than ever before. We're headed in likely a global depression, or at the very least a long recession. There will be fewer tax dollars to support innovation in public education. Just the basics of schooling are going to be barely getting by in the coming years. And so what that means is we need to achieve greater learning gains and more equitably, which is something that society in the US has not done that quite well very recently, without increasing stress, anxiety, and depression, which will be hard because the natural reaction to doing more things faster is to feel stressed about them. And so somehow we have to do more faster without increasing already historically high levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. And as I said, do this more cost effectively, maybe 10, 20, 30% more efficiently than ever before. So I said depression levels are a little high. Hopefully this doesn't add too much to your depression levels, but it is something that I'm deeply concerned about. And what I'd like to argue is that there are some overdue innovations that can help with all 3 of these issues that are not quite used sufficiently as they should be in the field. And these are things we should be considering as we think of the 6 to 18-month plan in responding to our crises. And I want to preview what we're doing about it. So one is attending to students' perspectives, right? So for 20 years, the dialogue around education reform was mostly around accountability, right? The idea that some schools are underperforming, maybe teachers aren't working as hard as they should, and students aren't, working as hard as they should, and we need people to be accountable to their test scores and so on. And of course, that's valuable. A lot of people have been committed to that, and it's been worthwhile in many ways. What it often leaves behind is the idea that students don't just come to high school, for example, to help their teachers and principals have higher test scores. They go to high school because they're social beings. They want to be around others who treat them well. They want to feel motivated. They want to feel included. They want to feel like they're on the path to something important, a purpose in life. Young people are craving meaning. And I think what the COVID crisis is going to show us is just how important relationships and culture and meaning are to the young people in our classes. When students have the chance to log on or not, and no one can force them to, there needs to be an attraction. And points or prizes and so on, those are unlikely to have kids log on. But the chance to be around people who care about you, who are pushing you to be your best, who treat you as though you're on the path to making a difference in the world, those are the kinds of experiences that, from students' perspectives, are draws. They draw people in our own lives, in our own professional lives. That's what we want. We want a workplace where we're contributing to the bigger picture, where we're making a dent in something important, where we have the chance to grow and we're not belittled for making mistakes. So I think teachers across the country are telling us that they're being forced to think in a new way about students' perspectives and reconsider things like mindsets, social and emotional learning, climate, and inclusion. And inclusion, of course, is even more so at the forefront of our minds in the midst of our nation's reckoning with racial justice. In our research, we focus on 3 different mindsets that students bring to the classroom. Growth mindset, the idea that intelligence can be developed; a belonging mindset, the sense that whether you fit in or not in the school environment can determine your motivation; and a purpose mindset, the ability to connect what you're learning today in your algebra and geometry class to a broader life goal, like making a difference in society. When students encounter classroom environments that support those mindsets, it's amazing. They start feeling respected by adults in the classroom. They feel like these people are there for me and they want me to do well. They develop a sense of trust that the worksheet I'm being given today is actually important and connected to something that matters, and I'm willing to do it because I trust that you're there for me. Those feelings and everyday student engagement behaviors that come from them, in turn, add up to important things like taking the advanced math and science courses that help you be prepared for college. They help you graduate on time because you're making progress in your credits. And ultimately, they affect college enrollment. So the reason why we can be optimistic in the midst of this crisis when we think about these mindsets is because human beings naturally are learners. We often think of the young people that are in our homes on online school who don't listen to us when we tell them it's time to log on. And I'm not speaking hypothetically. We have 4 kids at home in public schools. We often think of them as resistant to learning. But as a developmental psychologist, I have to remind myself again and again, human beings are nature's most amazing learning machine. And from birth, we want challenge. We want novelty. We want to collaborate. And a challenge for us as people who design schools is to make schools the kinds of places where that natural love of learning can come out. And the mindsets I just described facilitate that. They help bring out the natural love of learning that's inherent in the human condition. In a recent analysis, we surveyed those students I showed you their data on before, looking at college enrollment. We surveyed them in their 9th grade year. And we asked just a handful of questions, like 8 questions. Some measured their growth mindsets. Do you think intelligence is fixed, or do you think it can grow? If you think it can grow, you're in the high lollipop and the purple lollipop on the left. Students were 12 percentage points more likely to be in college 5 years later at all in the 2019-2020 school year if 5 years previously they answered 3 questions suggesting that they had a growth mindset. And that's kind of amazing, right? It's not the whole story, but that's a sizable difference for a small mindset. Belonging too. We asked students a single question in 9th grade. How often do you wonder, maybe I don't belong here? 5 years later, students were 12 percentage points more likely to be enrolled in college if they reported high belonging, which means that they were not thinking, maybe I don't belong here. Purpose. We asked students, what's your main reason for learning? Is it just to get a grade, or is it because you want to get skills that help you make a difference in your community or family or society? Students with a high sense of purpose on the left were 11 percentage points more likely to be in college 5 years later. Last thing was we said, how much do you feel like adults at your school treat you with respect? Again, 10 percentage points more likely to be in college 5 years later. You can sum all these up and say, if a student had none of the mindsets, what's their likelihood of being in college? The answer is 45%. If they had all the mindsets, 3 or more, what's their chance of being in college? The answer is 75%. That's a huge difference from something that is changeable, it's controllable, it's something we can attend to right now in the COVID era as we think about engaging our students online, and that can stay with us, stay with our students when we return to face-to-face instruction. So are these mindsets just traits? Can you change them? We've spent a long time developing targeted interventions. Under 1 hour, students can complete over the computer that teach them these mindsets. In one study, we just taught one of these mindsets, growth mindset, in 9th grade, And then we followed them over high school. And we found that students earned higher grades in their core classes, like math and science, but they also were more likely to enroll in Algebra 2 or higher sophomore year. That's that track that leads to college readiness that I showed you before. So a seemingly small change in a growth mindset at a key transition point, the start of ninth grade, can lead to a cycle that reinforces. Now, that was a cohort of students who did this in the pre-COVID era. So we still have the challenge of thinking about, how do we do this in online instruction? Well, these are online exercises, but how do we embed them in our instruction? How do we bring in the other mindsets? Those are open questions that I think this current crisis should motivate us to try to answer as a community. The second is, students don't just need a mindset, but the faculty and instructors themselves need to create climates that support students' mindsets. It's not enough to tell a student, hey, believe you can grow, or hey, why don't you think you belong? What we need to do as college instructors, as high school instructors, as middle school instructors, is to make it true that students can belong. And so we think that a second majorly overdue change in education is for instructors at all levels to work not just on the rigor of their courses or the organization of their courses or the type of test they give, but also the climate that they create, which sends signals to students about whether here in this place you'll be supported in your learning, whether here in this place I take you seriously as someone worthy of respect. Here in the picture you see some clip art from a hypothetical professor who says to a struggling student, I'm sorry it's hard for you, maybe you're just not a math person. Now you might say, who would ever say that? The answer is lots and lots of professors all over the country, and also lots and lots of high school teachers. And we know that from surveys that we've conducted. That is, many times we think it's comforting to tell people, this is just not your strength, it's not your talent. When we say that, we send students the signal that they are not cut out for that higher pipeline. Instead, they have a different pipeline. And we know that differentially, first-generation students and students of color are more likely to be pushed into the lower pipeline, not the higher one. How do we change this? One of the things we can do is conduct experiments. We did an experiment to change the way that critical feedback was given on students' essays. This is with Jeff Cohen at Stanford and Valerie Purdy Greenway at Columbia. Students in a 7th grade social studies class wrote an essay about their heroes. They got feedback like this, covered in red ink. And half of students got a message that was designed to support their mindsets. It said this: I'm giving you these comments because I have high standards and I know that you can meet them. It's a small message, but it has two powerful pieces. One is an appeal to the high standard. It says, it implies, I'm not giving you this feedback because I look down on you. I'm giving you this feedback because there's a standard for rigor in this class, and I'm holding you to that standard. But critically, it goes on to say, I know that you can meet that standard. And that's important because we don't just want to say, here's the standard, most of you won't cut it, and goodbye, right? Adolescents will feel like that's an unfair system. Instead, we accompany the appeal to the high standard with the assurance that I'm there for you and I can support you. What we found in an experiment where we looked at whether students were willing to revise their essays a week after getting that note or getting a control note that provided feedback but no information about high standards and assurance, what we found is that there was an achievement gap in the control condition where white students are more likely to revise their essays compared to African American students. But when students got the high standards and assurance note, just that one sentence, then white students were moderately but not significantly more likely to revise their essays, but African American students were dramatically more likely to revise their essays. Their revision rates went from 17% to 72%. And if you compare the light blue bars on the left and the right, what you see is actually, statistically at least, an elimination of the achievement gap, at least for this measure in this one time. What this suggests is that the language that instructors use in a vulnerable moment, at a time when someone is being critiqued or feeling inadequate, that language can have a big impact on engagement. And when we think especially about how vulnerability interacts with structural factors like segregation or stereotypes, right? And how inequality is recreated across these educational transitions, we can start imagining how a system in which classroom climates are systematically providing supportive messages like high standards and assurance might take us part of the way toward narrowing some of these gaps and accelerating achievement. And I bring this example up because changing our language in the classroom does not have to be a costly intervention. Furthermore, creating a supportive climate helps people deal with stress. So interventions like what we call WISE feedback, or high standards and assurance, they meet the criterion that I laid out. That is, they help improve achievement for all, they help narrow achievement gaps, they help reduce stress, but they also can do so cost effectively. I don't want to leave you with a message that one little post-it note can eradicate inequality in Texas or anywhere else. Instead, I think that environments need to be architected systematically to convey the mindsets of growth, purpose, and belonging. For 2 different fall semesters, I sat in on Uri Treisman's freshman calculus class because he is, in my opinion, the world's greatest at weaving together these 3 mindsets. The second year I did that, a journalist named Paul Tuff joined me in the classroom, and he wrote an amazing review of Uri's teaching in a book called The Years That Matter Most, which features UT in lots of positive ways. What you see in chapter 8 in this book is a description of a classroom environment that's designed from the ground up for belonging, purpose, and growth. Here's a quote from what Uri says early on in the term. He says, "Everyone in this class will struggle." That's meant to normalize struggle. No matter who you are, questions are going to be flying at you that you can't answer. If you don't understand that struggle is a pathway to learning, you'll think it means, oh no, I don't belong here. He goes on to explain that struggle is part of the process of learning, can be an indicator that your understanding is deepening. So he normalizes difficulty, and he goes on to describe how when you overcome that difficulty and you strengthen your skills, you're prepared to be a leader in your field and perhaps change the future of mathematics. Uri has some of the highest success rates and the lowest inequalities in math at the university. And this year, he's doing it all online, so we'll see how it goes. The last thing is, if you realize that this is an example of one super teacher, but we don't know very much about how to help all teachers across the state of Texas at all levels do something similar, then we have a real learning problem. That is, it would just be too slow to have everyone in Texas come sit in on Uri's class. And I mean, maybe now that it's videotaped, that could help. But at a minimum, the possibility of turning all teachers into bright spots is going to be a challenge, which suggests to me that we need to think differently about how we do research on innovation and how we spread innovation in education. That's the final overdue change, which is, I think, inspired by the triple challenges of our current moment. I think we need to integrate data systems and form partnerships for rapid learning. The Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, under the leadership of Harrison Keller, is at the forefront of this. Previously, systems like on-ramps and the ERC, working with TEA, have done this. This is something that needs to be invested in more and supported and used more widely. Just from my perspective as a researcher, a typical timeline for educational innovation is to do one randomized trial, like one drug trial, as it were, in 5 years. And then it takes usually another decade to go from successful trial to scale up. That's clearly too slow. We can't think about overcoming the COVID crisis and the global depression in 2035. This is not going to be acceptable. We need to be learning about dozens or even hundreds of innovations per year, starting this year, and then scaling them when rigorous evidence is available. That kind of rapid but rigorous evaluation is only possible when data on student outcomes is linked back to what was introduced in the educational context within days, weeks, hours, minutes. It's also only possible when the people who are designing innovations are working hand in glove with educational providers, so districts or instructional providers like on-ramps who provide dual enrollment across the state. So what I want to conclude is how we've tried to take these 3 overdue innovations and just start running with them in the last 6 months. And we hope to keep in touch with many of you about that. We're calling this work the Texas Mindset Initiative. The idea is to launch research practice partnerships at 2 levels: the start of high school, so 9th grade math, and also transition to college, so dual enrollment at the end of high school and introductory courses in college. And we're starting with a partnership with On-Ramps, who is reaches 1,500 instructors per year in dual enrollment in Texas high schools, and also the College of Natural Sciences here at UT. And the idea is to develop a scalable instructor intervention that improves math and science achievement, reduces math and science inequalities, while improving well-being and stress resilience, because it creates an inclusive and supportive environment. We want to do that, as I said, in the transition to high school and the transition to college. And what we're going to try to do is to use these overdue innovations. We have a shared goal of creating scalable intervention. We want to learn about the mindset practices of outstanding teachers, who are the mini Treismans across the state of Texas. How can we learn from them? We want to partner to form research infrastructure that allows the field to do rapid R&D. So how do we learn in December whether what we tried in August was working, so that we can revise it in time for January and then again for the following August? That's the type of cycle that education needs to be on. It doesn't need to be on the update what we do every 5-year cycle. And last, we need to find partners to rigorously and robustly evaluate things, but without it being really inefficient cost-wise. And so we think research practice partnerships like the ones we're launching with On-Ramps and natural sciences are a start for that. So what's next? We're aiming at all high school math instructors in Texas and all math and science instructors in college credit-bearing courses in the state of Texas in the next 5 years. That's what we're hoping for. But we're also hoping to go to learn from the Texas Mindset Initiative and start the Global Mindset Initiative. And that work will be kicked off in partnership with the OECD and PISA in a couple of weeks from now. So really, this is an example of Texas doing something that has the potential to change the world. So thank you all for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions and clarifications and anything that's on your mind. Thank you all very much.
The first is, what does research show about mindsets for different age groups?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing it shows is that as kids get older, they have more differentiated mindsets. So 5-year-olds don't think about being a math person versus a computer person. They think about being a good person or not. And so the mindset about your moral character is more salient to young kids. As you get older, you start thinking about domains. So it's, am I a math person? Am I a computer person? Am I a stats person? And so on. The other thing we know about age is that mindsets seem to kick in the most when there's difficulty happening. So if a kid is in a school where everything is easy for them and they're coasting, they actually don't need to use their mindsets very much or even develop them. And that's a problem we see at UT, where we have super high performing students who come, they get into my class and get critical feedback on their writing. And if they don't have a growth mindset, it can be hard to respond positively to the feedback. So mindset may not have mattered for them in their high school when they found it easy, but it's important later when you get to college. Last is that mindsets may seem like something you develop and then you're stuck with over time. In fact, that may seem to be true because of the data I showed you over 5 years. But in fact, at any point in life, people can change their mindsets. Mindset interventions have worked at later ages as well.
That's great news. Second question, how can this change start with students in high school as well as systemic changes and attitude changes psychologically?
Yeah, so we definitely think that high school can start off setting the stage with growth mindset. The intervention we developed in the National Study of Learning Mindsets is designed as a freshman orientation experience. And so right out the gate, students can be told, hey, this is high school, your grades count for college. That doesn't mean we're trying to push you out. We are challenging you because we think you can grow. Here are all the supports that we have for you to help you grow. So any transition at a time when someone feels, out of equilibrium or vulnerable that's a great time to change mindsets. Then there's a systemic question. Well, is it enough to tell students, hey, have a growth mindset in high school, but we're not going to do anything to help you. You just have to work hard on your own. And the answer is no. Adolescents are the world's greatest BS detectors. They are aware if we're being dishonest as teachers or administrators. And so it's up to us to not only say you can grow, but to point out how the system is designed to help you to grow.
Thank you. Could you talk about whether you see differences for male versus female students?
Yeah. So we tend to find, it's kind of interesting. So there's girls on average report modestly higher fixed mindset. It's like a 0.15, 0.2 standard deviation difference. It's not clear that that's really a difference in mindset. It's probably more a difference in internalizing symptoms. So girls in general are also more likely to experience depression and anxiety. And there are a number of reasons why, some owing to socialization. So girls at younger ages are socialized in ways where they're kind of expected to do many different things and do them all excellently all at once. And boys, in a lot of research, are held to lower standards for things like being neat or bringing your pencil and interpersonal behavior. And so the other thing is girls start puberty earlier, by about a year and a half or two, and pubertal maturation increases onset of depression and anxiety. So by the time you get to high school, you get a mindset difference, but it's mostly in the data a result of what's called overgeneralized thinking, or all or nothing thinking. The idea that if I don't do well here, I'll never do well and no one will ever like me. And that's more of in the matrix of internalizing mental health problems. I will say also that when we train mindsets, we often find larger effects on the stress outcomes for girls and young women. So when we bring them in the lab and do a stress test, like they have to give a surprise speech in front of others, women who got a growth mindset intervention tend to benefit more in terms of their stress signals. So I think mindset is something to look out for. It's not the sole cause, but it's a way to make progress on helping resilience for girls. But it certainly matters for boys too. Boys say, oh, I'm brilliant at this and I don't have to try. Or they say, I'm not a math person, why would I look dumb in front of them? And so fixed mindset is a problem there too.
Thank you. Research has shown that reaching kids in 6th grade is important, especially for underserved kids, to bring them to high levels in college and work life. Will you be reaching out to this level kid?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as a developmental psychologist, I'm interested in all moments of transition throughout the life course. 5th to 6th grade is another huge one. You're changing schools, you have a new peer group, you go from single classroom to many classrooms per day, at a time when you're craving deeper relationships as a young person. So developmental psychologists say there's a developmental mismatch between what 6th graders want, which is to be known and respected and cared for, and what they're given, which is they're anonymous people going to 8 classes per day, and also yelled at for not doing enough homework and school feels too hard, right? So many students leak in the pipeline at 6th grade. For the inequality story is kind of interesting in middle school. So there are race effects and there's social class effects. Race effects often come out in school discipline. So young people of color, especially young boys of color, are more harshly disciplined on average for the exact same offenses. So some of the data sets we've looked at where you look at offenses like defiance or disobedience, only Black boys are getting defiance and disobedience. White boys and girls are often verbally corrected in the class, but not sent to the office. And so by the end of 7th grade, there's that discipline gap turns into a trust gap. And so by the end of 7th grade, there's a huge gap between Black and white students in terms of trust that they'll be treated fairly by disciplinarians in the school. What we find is that the loss of trust in 7th grade, so how much from fall 7th grade to spring 7th grade, you disagree that adults are fair, that predicts whether Black students make it to college 6 years later. So I would say that 6th grade is totally critical, but it's also the beginning of a process. So just like a boulder that rolls down a hill gains more momentum with each revolution, it's really important to slow the boulder earlier on in 6th grade. But the huge consequences tend to happen end of 7th grade, in part because that's when discipline gets harsher. They've gotten to their 3 warnings, and in part because that's the year when students make their choices for 8th grade math. And once you're in the different 8th grade math tracks, then there's those different train tracks, as I was saying. Where I want to go with all this work is what you might call respectful climates in middle school. A hypothesis of mine is that because we know that youth of color are more likely to go through puberty a year and a half earlier on average, there's a physical body difference between Black youth, for instance, and white and Asian youth that could lead to this difference in discipline. And if we're able to come up with more respectful and inclusive disciplinary policies in middle school, maybe we could mitigate some of that boulder happening in middle school.
That's wonderful. Would students be better off to have virtual classes from an outstanding professor and a local lab with a local teacher? Will the move to virtual learning put thousands of teachers out of work?
That's a great question. I've often thought that for lecture, it'd be nice to have the world's expert give me that, but I always want to coach. It's like if you're a baseball player, you can watch how the pros, so like there's endless number of clips on pro baseball players, but you still need a coach who looks at your swing and tells you what's wrong. So I don't see human contact ever being unimportant for learning. We can also kind of take a lesson from expert tutors. So expert tutors get 1 to 2 standard deviation improvements in their students' learning. They're not changing the course content. The teacher, has a content, but it's the one-on-one where they listen to where the student's at. They provide the next question that's just hard enough for the student. They help the student deal with failure and difficulty in the moment. They get them excited about small goals. I think a lot of that one-to-one face-to-face psychology is irreplaceable. And if there were more kids getting the equivalent of expert tutoring, I think that would be good. What I don't think will happen is that local teachers are ever fully replaced, because so much of learning is group work and translation, and even the best lecturer has to make a guess about the middle of the road and what people know and don't know. And I can't imagine local teachers doing that translation and clarification if they're not also content experts. So at least if for high school, I think some blended learning might be a great thing, but if the main effect of all of this is to create more one-on-one coaching and deeper relationships, which we are seeing, by the way, the best teachers that we talk to are increasing their one-on-one Zoom calls with students, or they're on chat apps where they can answer physics questions at 11 p.m. That's possibly good for a lot of students.
Great. Growth, belonging, and purpose can be more difficult to achieve if basic needs or environment aren't safe or secure, according to Maslow's hierarchy. Have you found this to be a consideration or influencing factor?
Yeah, it's a great question. First, there's a new book on Maslow, and it's by Scott Barry Kaufman, who's a psychologist at Penn. And he went back and reread all of Maslow's unpublished notes and reinterprets, or just basically finishes Maslow's work, because Maslow didn't finish it. It turns out there's no pyramid ever in Maslow's theory. That's like when it got turned into textbooks later. So the idea of needing to do something before the others was not actually in Maslow's initial framework. And Scott goes into a lot of this. But I think a key idea is that humans crave meaning and significance and social connection at all times. And school can provide that when done well. And every ounce of energy that teachers pour into meaningful relationships with young people, taking them seriously and so on, is good. That doesn't replace hunger and it doesn't replace fears of physical safety. And hunger and fears of physical safety are both hugely corrosive for learning. So I don't think there's a either or there. But I do think we can make tremendous progress in pushing our most disadvantaged students by focusing on inclusion, respect, belonging, purpose, and a belief that all people can grow. The final thing I'll say is that there's a temptation to use the Maslow idea to say that in times of crisis, we need to slow down and not teach as much. But it turns out, people have analyzed this from just last spring, the places where instruction slowed down were poor schools, basically. And so that's evidence that inequalities will be wider in the coming year than ever before. And so I think a lot of scholars who focus on urban communities and poverty are saying that high expectations are a measure of love and respect for families and communities, as long as they're accompanied with adequate support.
Thank you. Very quick question. Can you repeat the author of the Maslow book again?
Yeah, Scott Barry Kaufman, Kaufman. Can we read the one that says that she's really impressed by the presentation?
Yes, thank you.
Just kidding.
There is a.
I'm just joking.
Who would like you to know they're impressed
Okay,
as an education retired university professor.
That was a joke.
Okay, so next question is, much of these seem incredibly effective and simple. What's the barrier to implementing them? Are teachers being pushed to emphasize and track less useful approaches, or are we asking them to do too many things, only some of which matter?
Yeah, that's a great question. One answer is if we know that the mindset a student has predicts important things, and sometimes we can develop treatments to change those mindsets, and they seem to work, then why isn't mindset practice happening all the time in every classroom? If it's really as easy as a Post-it note and a 1-hour thing, like what gives? Why isn't it just there all the time? And at some level, that's what we have to focus on. That's what research needs to understand, right? You could also ask, if we know that masks prevent COVID transmission, why aren't people wearing them, right? We know that overeating prevents diabetes. There's a million number of good things that science has already said can be simple and can work, and people don't do them. And some people have argued that at a high level is the single biggest question for social and behavioral science. Why don't people do the good things that they know they should do, but instead they do the other things? So that's not a cop-out. That's just saying that it's a good question, and it's actually why we need more investment in rapid research on this topic, just like we need rapid research on implementing COVID prevention behaviors. But we do have an inkling of an answer. We think that, first of all, some instructors are really mired in a fixed mindset about, depending on the measure, let's say 25 to 30%. And I don't mean that as like a trait judgment. I just mean that over the lifetime, people develop worldviews, and that those worldviews make sense for them. They help them interpret the world, and so they use them. And fixed mindset is one of those. And so fixed mindset practices flow out of that mindset. If you fundamentally think only half of your students are talented enough to be mathematicians, or maybe only 10%, then you don't help your bottom 20% to understand the hardest materials. You give them the easy materials and tell them to remediate and catch up. And you're not being malicious, it's just your theory of student success. And so we need to change the mindsets of some teachers, but in a way where we're being respectful to them and to where they're coming from, in a way where they can hold on to these ideas and make them make sense. Then what about the other 70%? Well, a lot of people want to do growth mindset, but they mistake it for other things that are not growth mindset, like telling students to try hard, or to be positive, or to be optimistic. Those are fine messages, but if a kid is struggling and factoring trinomials for hours on end and hating their life doing it, a teacher telling you to try harder doesn't make them want to do it more, because maybe they are trying really hard, and now they think the teacher isn't there for them because they're telling you to try harder alone. So kind of hollow self-esteem boosting is not the route to growth mindset. So we need to replace shallow, false growth mindset practices with more authentic ones. And we think an approach of studying Treisman-like instructors, observing what they do, and then trying to train other teachers to do those things is the way to go. And we think that's why we need an R&D infrastructure, because who knows how many variations on the WISE feedback post-it note there are in real life. We need to know the answer to that question. So that's why we're as committed to the question of mindset and inclusion in math and science as we are to the question of research infrastructure, because there's too much to learn.
What do you do for the top learners while doing a great job for each child?
Yeah, so I don't think growth mindset is only focused on lower achievers, although this talk mostly focused on that. It's just as relevant for the highest achievers. And the reason why is because if you're confident in your ability, then you're also usually aware that other people see you as high ability, which means if you do something that's out of your comfort zone, then you might be outing yourself as not quite as talented as you thought you were. And so a personal example is every year I teach, or most years I teach, a Plan 2 seminar at UT Austin. So Plan 2 is an honors program, and they claim to select the highest performing students across the state of Texas. And every year students need evidence that growth mindset is true. And it's very uncomfortable to get your first essay back and get a 60, which is what most students get on my first assignment. And then they have many opportunities to improve over time. And I show them the graph of their growth over time. And that helps them realize that college is not about looking the smartest all the time. College is about growing. But also, it helps those high performers, even though they were probably going to do well and be doctors anyway, it helps them not only do the hard work with less stress, which is very important, even if the grades aren't higher, but it helps them be better leaders and teammates for other students. When you have compassion for other people's struggles, that's really powerful. And that's the kind of climate that we need. So I think mindsets are A, helpful for achievement for high achievers who might rest on their laurels, B, helps them deal with stress, and C, helps them be better leaders and collaborators for others.
That's great. Okay, this is the last question for you. How can parents create supportive climates for growth mindset to ensure that their children succeed as they take on more of the teaching roles at home?
Yeah. It's always challenging because as parents, we, myself included, wear many hats. We're disciplinarians sometimes, we're providers of food and affection other times, and now we have to be teachers too. And from our kids' perspectives, it's hard for them to realize we're wearing a different hat at a given moment. Having said that, there are ways that we talk which can imply a growth mindset. So talking about smartness and dumbness implies to our kids that the world is divided into smart and dumb, and that if you struggle, might be in the dumb camp, and if it's easy for you, you're in the smart camp. That one's kind of obvious to most people. What's less obvious is talking about how the goal is for something to be easy implies to the kids that struggle is bad. So when we say, look, just get through this, then it's going to be easy for you. That implies that that struggle is a discomfort you're supposed to overcome. But in fact, yes, you're supposed to go up and down, but once you're comfortable, you should be seeking out the next challenge. So I'll just say what I say in my house. So when my kids master something and I say, oh, that's so exciting, what are we going to do next? What's the next hard challenge? They're young enough that they don't roll their eyes yet at that. But we're constantly talking about the next challenge and so on. I correct their language if they say, I'm not good at this. I'm saying, you haven't mastered this yet. The people who do know how to do this right away, they've had lots of training or they've had lots of practice. And you can get better at this. When my kids are tempted to compare themselves to others, like that person's better at this than me, I say, the goal is not to be better than other people. The goal is to be better than you are now. anyone can improve, including you. So here's what, and then I walk through the steps of here's what we're going to do. Finally, it's not like my kids are always learning all the time. And there's actually very little learning in my house during the COVID crisis. But it is important to emphasize the need to relax and take a break. But I don't think the goal is to protect our children from all difficulty, but rather to give them a perspective on difficulty as desirable and in line with what human beings naturally want, which is to learn and explore and develop. And so when we overly protect our kids, we imply to them that the goal is the easy life, and that's not really true. And when we support them to have a growth mindset, we imply to them that growth and development is the goal, and that's in line with our kind of state of nature as humans.
That was very helpful for us parents. Really appreciate that. So Dr. Yeager, we appreciate you sharing your important work with all of us and embodying the idea that what starts here changes the world.